Good morning. My name is Sean. I might be a familiar face. My boys and I were part of a Joy video bumper, just similar to the one that you saw today. I have been a member of this community almost since the first days, since Watershed's inception. I have volunteered in Greenhouse for over 10 years, and I am a member of the lead team, which is akin to sort of a group of elders or an advisory board. To me, advisory board just sounds a little bit better than elders, but and today, I just want to share a little bit of my story with you in this series about trauma and ghost stories and maybe the lies that we tell ourselves. My name is Sean Bowers Buxton, but I also have another name that I use in professional settings. I'm a college professor. But I'm also a published poet. And the story of how I came to my pen name, I think at least, is a little bit interesting. And so I share it with you now. I was in grad school submitting my work out when I was getting my MFA in creative writing, and I was getting a lot of rejection letters, and that's, I think, par for the course in the industry, and I didn't think much of it. It was sort of in process, and I would just bolster myself every time a new rejection letter would come in the mail. But I had applied for this fellowship, this writer's colony, and one of my mentors was actually on the selection committee. He recused himself, of course, but my batch of poems had risen sort of to the final round of selection. And as he tells it, it was a confusing read for the advisory board because they weren't sure why a white male was writing about the Latina feminine mystic experience, because Sean Bowers did not match the content of what I was writing. And so he kind of let it play out for a little bit, and he finally interjected and he said, look, I've got to stop you guys. The he that you're talking about is in fact a she, and she was born in Costa Rica. And when he recounted the story to me, it was a collective light bulb moment that went off in the room, like, oh. And resoundingly, the feedback was, she needs to change her name, just flat. So he kindly told it to me in a little bit nicer tones over coffee. And I thought about that for a second, change my name. And I wrestled with it for a little while, and I think probably, if I'm being truly honest, my ego and my vanity won out, and I said, fine, I'll change my name. And partly, I think I was hoping to prove them wrong, because I was expecting full-on more rejection letters under a new name. And I didn't know even where to start with picking a new name. How does one do that? So what I ended up doing, Sean doesn't really have a Spanish translation. None of my 26 first cousins, aunts, and uncles in Costa Rica can say the word Sean. It's not an easy word to say. So in Costa Rica, everyone has always called me Shanita, but that's a made-up name. It's like an empty vessel of a thing that does not exist. So I was like, well, Google Shanita. And as it turns out, there's actually some links to that in indigenous culture that is not mine. So then I don't want to appropriate Native American culture and have them think that I should be writing about something else entirely. So I siphoned off the SH and I ended up with Anita. Sounds Latina enough to me. Fine. Perfect. And then my mother's maiden name is Cantillo. So I had this beautiful, sparkling new name, Anita Cantillo. And y'all, I went ahead and just slapped that thing down on a submission letter and sent it out, forgetting that my cousin's name is Ana, and she goes by Anita. So essentially, I stole my cousin's name. That's a different story. Thank God she does not live in this country. So Anita Cantillo goes out into the world. And you guys, the first thing that I sent out with that name got published. And what I didn't think about was that now I have this self out in the world as Anita Cantillo, and then I have this self out in the world as Professor Sean Bowers, and then my married name because I haven't legally changed it yet, is Sean Bowers Buxton, and it's just really confusing. I have been introduced in writing panels as Anita Cantillo. So there are times in my life where these places sort of collide, and it's confusing because it's a really odd thing to wear two names. It's like, I think, donning on a mask, really. In a lot of ways, Anita Cantillo more accurately represents my identity than Sean Bowers does. But Sean is the name that my birth parents gave me. I've grown into this name. I have spent a lifetime of explaining it, being the skinny hand raised in the classroom when they're going through roll and saying, no, yeah, it's me, right? Or correcting someone politely when they say Shauna, and no, it's Sean. I've grown into that name. So to hide behind a different one feels dishonest to me. W.E.B. Du Bois, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He co-founded the NAACP, and he wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folk. It is a really important text, I think, in African American culture, or just American culture in general. He was an early activist for Black rights. In his book, he coined a phrase called double consciousness. And I will read it out to you, but it's also on the screen. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness. This sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. Of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in contempt and pity. When I first read this in my college African American lit class, I had the sensation of being seen for the first time. Sort of this profound understanding. And I realize I'm neither African American or a man, but this notion of how people of color show up in a space, of how brown and Black bodies show up in places, it struck a really deep chord in me. And I think my two names do that. I think that they reflect my duality. One name is how I see myself. I think the other name is how others see me when I show up in space. I'm using duality here as sort of a stand-in for the notion of plurality. I think that we are not just binary constructs, right? There are multiple sides to our personalities. But I think for the sake of this conversation, if you could just hang with me, I'd like to consider duality as the different parts of the self that make up the whole. So not necessarily a binary construct, but rather a holistic one. I have spent a lifetime navigating the world as a brown woman. I've been called spick. I've been told to get back on a boat and go back to where I came from. I've been painfully reminded of how others see me constantly. I realize that these are others that don't know me, that don't realize I have a white father who was born in Ohio. Others that don't understand how Sean Bowers Buxton belongs to a Latina. But it's a duality I can't run from. It's a duality I wear every day. And it is taking me an embarrassing long time to understand that I don't have to run from it. Gloria Anzaldúa, maybe a name that people are less familiar with. She, God rest her soul, but she was a queer Chicana feminist poet all around badass. I did not realize my boys were going to be here today, so sorry for cursing. That was bad. But Gloria studied this concept of borderlands really closely, and she talks about things like language and gender roles, and she also actually says something about consciousness that I think pairs nicely with W.E.B. Du Bois. And she frames it as a Mestizo consciousness, a consciousness of duality, of embracing ambiguity and contradiction. And I think the key term here I want to settle in on a little bit is mestiza. It refers, basically, literally translates to mixed, right? A blending of cultures, perhaps, or a heritage made up of multiple identities. And I think that we all carry within us a borderlands, mestiza, double consciousness. I think particularly if we're looking at Anzaldúa or W.B. Du Bois, it suggests that folks on the margin, that Black and brown people, know keenly what it means to wear a mask of duality, to understand their experiences living in liminal spaces, and to always be aware of how they're perceived by others. Gloria, I think, takes it a little step further and claims a certain amount of pride in leaning into those hard places. She calls it living in the hyphen. Again, imagine my profound sense of being seen in text, living in the hyphen of what it means to be Latina American. In many ways, my whole life has been a slow act of decolonization and leaning into that hyphen. My dad is white. My mother is from Costa Rica. Duality has been woven into the DNA of my being since the very first days. And admittedly, the professor sort of nerd in me can get easily caught up in the rhetoric of all of that. But I think that double or mestizo consciousness or borderlands or wearing a mask, all of that becomes really crystal clear for me in the lived experience outside of my classroom and outside of books. In this series, that's sort of what we're doing, I think, is exploring ghost stories, these hauntings that we live with, that keep us maybe perhaps from being our true selves. I have not felt the pang of this more than after birthing 2 children who look nothing like me. Nothing. They take after dad, clearly, obviously. But listen, y'all, I have noticed this cultural fascination that happens with twins, and I know I see another fellow twin mama in the room, and it's just a thing. I think people are just really fascinated with twins. Before the boys were verbal, I promise we could not go anywhere without getting stopped and I think the red hair also has something to do with it. But everywhere we would go, somebody would just ask or want to talk to them. It typically would go down something like this: pretend I'm at Target or the grocery store or the park, and usually some woman or person, usually a white woman, would inevitably ask, "Where do they get their red hair from?" It always happens. That's the first question. And so what I would normally say is, well, my husband was a redhead. It's more auburn now. And they're like, oh. And it's this, oh. Look down at the kids, look up at me. Down at the kids. And there's this like slow dawning that's happening, like, oh, they're yours, right? True story, have been asked if their mom or their dad had the red hair. One time a woman spoke to me really loudly and slowly in English. I think she thought I was like the Mexican nanny. These are true stories, right? And so there's always this little like cloud of confusion and this moment of like, oh, that's awkward. Okay, they're hers, right? And the question's always innocent, right? Where do they get their red hair from is always an innocent question. But usually I don't know how to get out of that conversation without eliciting a dialogue that some way illuminates my otherness. I don't know how to do it. So usually, I say, well, my dad had red hair, it's salt and pepper now, that kind of thing. And I think what's happening is that the composite picture of me with my little red-headed, pale-faced children just doesn't add up. And I get that. I ain't mad at it. It just is. I lost the gene lottery on that one. But this happens next. Next, I get, where are you from? Y'all, I have spent the last 6 years of my life dissecting this repeated experience. I think I've gotten really good at reading responses of curiosity, and while the intent behind the question is often benign, I think at its heart, the question, where are you from, is a microaggression. A microaggression is a statement, an action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, maybe like a racial or ethnic minority. Where are you from? I would like for you to ask yourself this: would a white woman get the same question? I get that small talk eventually leads to where are you from, or what part of Charlotte do you live in, or are you from Charlotte originally? We ask that question a lot. I feel like nobody lives in Charlotte is from Charlotte except for maybe my husband, right? So I think I get that sort of small talk conversation. But would someone ask a white woman where she was from in the first 30 seconds of a conversation that goes similar to mine? Would your second sentence to a white stranger toting a white baby in aisle 9 of Harris Teeter be, where are you from? I don't think it would. So then I want to ask, why ask it of me? Often I reply, Charlotte. I've lived here long enough. It feels like home. I've been here so long. Charlotte is home. Most people, your mama's raised you right, stop after that question. Like, they get it. They're like, okay, done, we're done. Great, I'm going to grab my cereal and move on, right? Some people do that. A lot of people, more than you would imagine, follow up with, no, but where are you really from? Or where are you originally from? And again, I get it, like brown person, white children, I get it. But I understand I think we're cute most days. Picture their white freckled skin, their blue eyes, a shock of carrot top red hair, ×2 no less. I get it, that looks a lot not like me. I'd be curious too. But at the root of that question, where are you really from? I think if we unearth that, is really about otherness. Where are you from suggests you can't be from here, which suggests you're not one of us. And that I get this question only when I'm with my boys and never when I'm by myself suggests something too. I don't get where are you from when I'm by myself. I don't get where are you from when it's Bo, me, and the boys. We still get where does their red hair come from. We never get where are you from. I think what that suggests, and which I've never said out loud, is that my proximity to whiteness is uncomfortable for some people. Do I think that people that ask me that question are racist? No and yes. In his latest book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, activist and author Ibram Kendi makes this really compelling argument, I think, that every action either is racist or it's anti-racist. You can't be a little bit racist, like that's not a thing. You either are, the action is, or it is not, right? There's no spectrum there. But I think what he's asking us to do is to look at actions as racist or anti-racist. And if we do that, that frees us up to better understand that identities are fluid. I can have a racist moment in one context, but do the work of anti-racism in others. In other words, racism is not a fixed character trait. In most people, I think anyway. It's not a fixed character trait. And so if we stopped thinking about it as I don't want to be called a racist and started opening up our eyes to how did I do something that may have been racist, I think we'd push the dialogue a lot further. Put another way, I think that recognizing the masks is also about understanding our points of privilege, of waking up to how we show up in a space. As a professor, I wield a lot of privilege. I am the power broker in my classroom. Those students have to figure out what it is that I'm looking for if they want to get a passing grade. I have and hold a lot of power in that room. When I'm at a department meeting or at a university-wide meeting and I can count on one hand how many Latinas or brown people there are in the room, that's a little less privilege, right? But it's fluid. I think that we have all privilege, and we have all been marginalized, which is to say that I am not always the mother in the park scrambling to defend my birthright. We all get it wrong sometimes. When I assume that my son's new friend has a mom and a dad, and I learn that he has 2 dads, I screwed it up. When I look at my roster of students before a new college semester begins and I read Ryan on the list and assign a gender to it, yes, I have done that. Yes, my name is Sean. Yeah, I screwed up. An activity that I like to do with my students to help them sort of see the many lenses we view life from is to have them jot down attributes of themselves. And usually it would be like student athlete, or Southern boy, or brother or sister. If I asked you guys to do the same, maybe our responses would be mother, father, Black, Protestant, gay, daughter, cisgender, son, working mom, stay-at-home dad, liberal, agnostic, transgender, conservative, feminist. Those are the lenses, right? The masks that we wear daily. I wonder, though, if we're forgetting something. I know that I forgot something for many, many years. I think that putting on the masks thing is recognizing those that have been imposed to us by society. For example, the way that I thought my son's friends' family ought to look like is an antiquated notion of what a traditional family is, right? Mom, dad, 2 kids, dog, white picket fence. There is no traditional family anymore, right? Sometimes we make the masks ourselves to conform, to fit in, to put people at a distance. Sometimes the mask is prescribed to us. The new divorcee trying to figure out what single parenting looks like, who never ever dreamed she or he would show up in a space bearing that identity, but whom everybody treats with kid gloves, assuming there's a certain brokenness there. We've done that, right? If we look in the mirror, we see ourselves, both as we are and as others see us. Double consciousness. I don't think that's what God intended for us, though. Paul talks about this, I think, actually. He understands this notion that we wear false masks. He says that the image that we see in the mirror isn't a full picture of our whole selves. I'm going to read 2 translations, if you don't mind, because I think they both offer an understanding and value to this conversation. So the first one is from the NIV version. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. It's 1 Corinthians, right? The Message version is a little bit different, and it says, we don't see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog, peering through a mist. But it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then. See it clearly as God sees us, knowing him directly just as he knows us. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Just before this, in chapter 13, Paul's talking about the unity and diversity of the body. I think it's one scripture, if you come from a church setting, you're probably familiar with, right? The many parts that form the one body. And if you think about this historically, Paul's talking to a bunch of Greeks, right, in Corinth. And Corinth at that time is made up of lots of different factions. And so I think that metaphor of the parts equaling the whole makes a lot of sense, right? The eye is no greater than the foot. I think this is an attempt by Paul to humble Corinthians a little bit. No one is better than the other. But in this mirror metaphor, I think Paul is saying that we see things in a way that's distorted, that the masks aren't real. He reminds us that we were created in God's image. We bear her likeness. God formed us. His creative and divine hand fashioned us into being, which means God made me with a hyphen. I'm Latina, American, I'm brown, and white. What if I leaned into that more? What if we all leaned into the messy, complex tension of our hyphens? The hyphen of a working parent. The hyphen of being pro-choice politically, but pro-life personally. The hyphen of life after a profound, deep loss. The hyphen of being transgender. The hyphen of single parenting. The hyphen maybe of being a member of a liberal church but espousing conservative ideals. I could go on. What is your hyphen? I'm willing to bet one of my kids, I have 2 of them, they look a lot alike. I'm willing to bet that you have one. that you have a hyphen. And what does it mean to embrace the ambiguity of that hyphen, as Gloria Anzaldúa suggests? For her, as a Mexican American, or Chicana, she leans into it. She lives, and not just lives, I think she abides in the hyphen. I love that word, abides. It suggests a sense of thriving that I love. In my case, to embrace the duality of being both white and Latina is exactly what I'm called to do. I feel like growing up, this was really hard when every form, school form, doctor's form, passport, the census, the bank, like all the freaking forms, made me check only one box. I only got to check one box. Y'all, I am done with that mess. I'm not doing it. We all wrestle with the tension of our dual selves, but let's make it a celebration instead of this thing that we're afraid to do. Let's not don on masks to fit in or get by. Let's embrace the fullness of our identities, rife though they may be, with complexity, with tension, with confusion. What would that look like? I think normally this is where Scott or Matt would close us out in prayer. And when I was thinking about this, every time I thought, how do I write myself out of this? A poem came to mind. A poem I wrote. So this part of sharing is a little bit more scary than the last part. But I'd like to read it now if that's okay, perhaps as a form of prayer. Southern Brown. These days, it's a toss-up. I could just as much be from here as I am from there. Half of us are born on this side, the good side. Even if we grew up eating rice and beans, we claim two native tongues. I am no more from there, the side that some want to keep fettered out, than I am from here. My dichotomy is sweet tea and agua dulce, barbecue and tamales, and even though the rooster sings to me in Spanish, kikiriki, the hens cluck just the same. And whether I crack the eggs over rice or serve it with bacon, it all keeps my belly warm. Depending on the season, I either have a really nice tan or I'm that tricky shade of brown. As soon as I open my mouth to speak, you guessed wrong. Thank you.